Hello, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. Slide, please, Sophie. Again, thank you to all of you for joining this webinar. It's the second webinar of a series that we at Cloud Network have started in February with a webinar linking CVA and social protection at the regional level. This time we go to Nigeria with the Nigeria case study. Slide, please. As you can see, this webinar is in English, but we have the French interpretation available. So please go select your language in the icon button that you see below your screen and select your preferred language. This webinar will last 1 hour and a half, so 1 hour 30 minutes. And all your mics are muted. So please use the Q&A box to engage with the presenters, with the speakers, and with the panelists for asking questions. And please use the chat if you wish to introduce yourself. This webinar is recorded and will be made available on the CALP webpage. So we will share with all participants the link together with also the presentation. Please, for all the presenters and panelists, speak slowly so that the interpreters have time to translate. Thank you. Slide, please. This is the agenda. So as we said, we have 1 hour 30 minutes together. So I'm Mirko Tomasi. I'm the regional representative of CALP Network. And together with my colleague Celine Sintiski, the technical advisor at the CALP Network and the responsible for social protection, we are hosting you at today's webinar. The agenda, we have after these housekeepings and the presentation of the agenda and the panelists, we have some opening remarks. Then we have 2 presentations. One will be done from basics, and one is a ground truth solution presentation. And then we will have 40 minutes panel discussion. I will introduce you all the panelists shortly. And finally, we have a 10 minutes wrap up and conclusion. Slide, please. So it is a little smaller, but as we have a lot of people today, we thought it was good to have all them together. So happy to present, I'm honored to present all the speakers, panel moderator, and also the representative of the Nigerian government for some opening remarks. So we have the pleasure to have today Mr. Muhammad Bashir from the Yobe State, Nigeria. And then we have 3 speakers, Fred Mertens and Louis Ode from IDS Basics, and Hannah Miles from Ground Truth Solution. We have also the panel with 4 people and the moderator. The moderator is Stephen Loist, and he's a humanitarian advisor with FCDO. And the panelists are, again, Mr. Bashir from Yobe State, and then we have Emmanuel Atam from FACT Foundation, Hakim Ajibola from WFP Nigeria, and Abiodun Abaniwo from Action Against Hunger Nigeria. Slide, please. No, sorry, Sophie, go back. Thank you. So now I have the pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Muhammad Bashir Ibrahim, that is the Director of Budget in the Ministry of Budget and Planning at Yobe State. Mr. Bashir is an economist from the University of Maiduguri, and he holds also a master's degree in business administration from a UK university. Mr. Bashir has more than 21 years of experience in the public service with Yobe State government. He rose through the rank of planning officer to AG Director of Planning, position that he holds from 2003 to date. He has held several other doctor's duties and has worked in several programs supported by international partners such as UNICEF, the World Bank, and others. He's also a consultant as a facilitator trainer with Waya Consult Service and is happily married with 3 kids. Mr. Bashir, please add any information that I have forgotten to present you, and please over to you for some opening remarks of this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Miko. I think you have said it all. It captures my bio perfectly, and I work with the Yobe State government of Nigeria. As you're all aware, Nigeria is the most populous Black nation with an estimated population of more than 200 million. And Yobe is one of the states in the northeastern region, and one of the BAI state with an acronym of BAY, which stands for Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe. These are the 3 states.
It looks like that we have lost the contact. We have lost internet connection.
States most affected by the, it has compounded. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, now you are back. We lost you for a few seconds.
All right, thank you. Problem with the network here. I'm also the unit, which is a World Bank supported project through the federal government of Nigeria, specifically to establish a database of poor and vulnerable households, possible interventions of all social protection, programming. I'm also the member of the state cash working group representing government from the budget and planning perspective. I am also the secretary of the Yobe State Social Protection Technical Working Group, and I've done my own, contributions towards enhancement of social protection.
Hello?
In Yobe State. Like I said, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. But if
All right.
the internet connection is, yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, so Yobe is battling, 2 issues. One has to do with developmental, and the other has to do with humanitarian, in the sense that the decade-long insurgency as a result of the Boko Haram, insurgents, communal crisis, as well as farmer harder, crisis. We're also affected by natural disasters such as desertification, because the northern fringe of Yobe is mainly desert area. Then, in addition to that, we also have, flooding and other forms of natural disasters. On the developmental strides, Yobe happens to be one of the states with the highest level of poverty, inflation, income inequality, unemployment, and underemployment. In terms of social needs, We have one of the highest number of out-of-school children. We also have high rate of nutrition or malnutrition and food insecurity. So basically, the Yobe State government has been doing its best to curtail these two uh, issues. What the Yobe State government have put in place first is the development of the state development plan, which we called with an acronym YOSERA, Yobe Socio-Economic Reform Agenda. It was like a medium-term plan of 4 years, which commenced around 2004. And we had a four-year plan ranging from YOSERA 1, 2, 3, up to 4, with the last YOSERA that ended in the year 2020. The state is now in the process of rolling over the fifth version of the plan. However, it's now considered as a long-term plan, which range for a 25-year period from 2025 to 2050. With that in place again, Yobe State government was able to domesticate the national social policy, where we now have our own version, the Yobe State Social Protection Policy. Then, with the issue of insurgency, the Yobe State government was able to develop a policy on internal displacement and durable solution, which was just launched last week with the support of our partners. Of course, there was also a rehabilitation and development plan for the insurgency-prone areas, and then the establishment of the State Operation Coordination Unit, which warrants the establishment of data bank of poor and vulnerable households called the Social Register that fits into the National Register. So all these are efforts put in place to strengthen, coordination, intervention between government, development partners, and international organizations to harness our resources and work in synergy for the enhancement of social protection in Yobe. With that, we've been able to establish that data bank in three key data areas. The first one is called the Social Register, which is the register of poor and vulnerable households residing in communities. Then we have a second register called the URB, which is the Universal Register of Beneficiaries for internally displaced people. We also have a third register called the RRR, which is the Rapid Response Register. This was as a result of the lockdown in the year 2020 as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, where urban poor were locked and they lacked access to basic amenities, and that also threw more people into more poverty. So these three data are now being used as a targeting mechanism where we can target our beneficiaries for interventions in terms of social protection programming. Then we've also had series of government policies put in place in terms of education, infrastructural development, health, agriculture. And these are the most top priorities for the Yobe State government. And of course, the Ministry of Budget is now strengthening its coordination approach, where our partners key into the state to harmonize and synchronize our programming for the betterment of our people. So I'm really highly honored and overwhelmed to be in this forum and to share what the Yobe State government of Nigeria is doing in terms of synchronizing social protection and cash and voucher programming. My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bashir, for these very good opening remarks. I won't come back to all of them, but because also we had some internet issue, but I hope that really this webinar will help also the government of Nigeria and all humanitarian and development partner to boost this conversation and to have good improvements. Just a communication before giving the floor to my colleagues, Celine. We have finally Valentino Zulu, the director of the humanitarian affairs, that is trying to connect. We didn't know because he didn't confirm that he was available. So if he will participate, we will let also him maybe during the webinar or at the closing remark to have some words in addition to what you already said, Mr. Bashir. Thank you again, Mr. Bashir, and over to you, Celine.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So now it's time for us to move to some of the presentation. So the first one would be a presentation from BASICS, a Better Assistance in Crisis, which is a research part of the Institute of Development Study and is a foreign Commonwealth and Development Office funded program examining why, how, and when to use social protection approach in different crisis contexts to deliver more effective social assistance to vulnerable population cope better with crisis and make their basic need. So for presenting the report that has just been published a bit earlier this year, we have two of the researchers, Fred Mertens, who is a senior researcher specializing in poverty analysis and social protection policy. He has over 17 years of experience designing and leading multidisciplinary applied research project for public policy reform. He is a technical lead on the targeting work stream of the BASIC research program. And we also have Louis Audet with us today, with a developed researcher specializing in rural livelihood studies, poverty analysis, impact evaluation, social protection, agriculture commercialization, and climate change. Mostly recently, Louis worked on a principal research assistant at the Institute of Statistical, Social, and Economic Research, University of Ghana. And Louis is a quantitative researcher on the targeting workstream for the BASIC research program. So up to you.
Many thanks, Celine, for the introduction, and hi everyone. Thanks for taking time to listen to us. We were invited here by CALP to present, just to really set the scene a little bit for your important and interesting conversation about feedback mechanisms and coordination between social protection and humanitarian intervention in the context of Nigeria. So, you know, as Celine mentioned, we've developed a case study. It's one of three looking at the targeting of social assistance in crisis contexts. The three case studies cover Niger, Ethiopia, and Nigeria, and each one is looking at a kind of different particular crises. So in Niger, it was the drought that occurred around 2012. In Ethiopia, we're looking at the context of COVID, and in Nigeria, we were looking at the context of violence and insecurity. But of course, you know, these crises often and very often overlap with multiple crises. So political crises can overlap with economic crises and climate-induced crises and so on. And that's definitely the case that we find in Nigeria, as you'll see. So we're not going to present, you know, everything that we have in our study. We really just wanted, with discussions with Celine and Mirko, to set the scene. So we'll try and do that. I will present a couple of slides and then pass over to Louis, who can talk us through some of our results around targeting and the analysis that we did there. But just to say that the other thing that's probably important to know about this study is that it's not that designed to kind of, you know, produce recommendations on what is the best approach for targeting in Nigeria, not in the least. Really, it is alongside these other two case studies, designed to kind of indicate the kind of challenges and the kind of considerations and trade-offs that people running social assistance or humanitarian cash and voucher assistance might need to think about when they do their targeting. So they're kind of, I guess, educational in that regard. The idea of the studies is to kind of put a lot of these issues that policy designers and policy implementers face when they try to deliver social assistance on the ground in these kinds of contexts, and just to kind of explain the trade-offs and the challenges that you may face when you do that. Okay, please, next slide, Celine. Okay, so just a few words building on what Mr. Bashir said to kind of set the scene about what the context is. I'm sure that you're all very aware of this, but obviously violence and other kinds of shocks are quite prevalent in Nigeria in recent years, and in particular in the north of the country, the center, the east, and the west. You can see from this graph on the left, those bottom two red areas and the light blue area all are north central, northeast, and northwest, and they show the amount of fatalities, or at least the known and recorded fatalities over a period of 10 plus years. So you can see that there were spikes in around 2014 and 15, and in more recent years also a growing amount of violence with Boko Haram in particular, and the herder-farmer conflict in addition. So, you know, violence has been one kind of constant over the last number of years, but it's not the only kind of shocks that households face. The graph on the right shows the kind of shocks that households report, and they include both, you know, violent events and illness and deaths, but as well, you know, loss of income and loss of jobs and loss of important contacts for livelihoods, or climatic shocks, or, you know, livelihood shocks like illness or pests for crops and diseases and livestock, as well as price shocks and, you know, high food prices or high input prices or poor produce prices. So the point is that what the data show, the national survey data show, is that these households are in constant kind of strain from all manner of different kinds of shocks. And there's evidence to suggest that perhaps their ability to cope and their kind of resilience is diminishing over time, both in terms of the resilience and the ability to cope of individual households, but they of course rely on wider networks in their communities, their friends and families who may be close by geographically or further afield. But the more and more that communities and households are under these kinds of pressures, the less and less ability they also have to support each other. So, you know, some of the analysis that we did just kind of indicated this problematic. And the other major challenge is the sort of structural challenges with the labour market and the lack of investment in infrastructure, especially up in the north, where there's big disparities in terms of access to, you know, banking and electricity and quality sanitation and quality housing and other essential infrastructure for people to sort of work their way out of poverty. And vis-a-vis the labour market, what we have is just, in effect, you know, to put it crudely and shortly, not enough adequately paying wage employment. And so this is proving a major challenge to enable households to develop the human capital and use their livelihoods to lift themselves out of poverty. So it's a set of circumstances and a set of situations that indicate a high need for both humanitarian intervention in many cases and oftentimes, but as well as more routine social protection, and in particular social assistance. Next slide, please, Celine. Thank you. So this is a graph that depicts the welfare distribution, and what it shows us is that it's a highly unequal welfare distribution, that you have a lot of people who are kind of all concentrated in and around the poverty line, and then a few people who are much, have much higher welfare than that. So it's highly unequal, and this, what we call a flat welfare distribution, makes it very difficult to distinguish between the poor and the extreme poor and the non-poor for a large part of that distribution. And what we've seen through, looking at household budget survey data from around 2010 to 2019 is that the shape of this distribution is not really changing over time. In addition, poverty has not really changed over time either. There was a slight decline in the poverty rate between 2010 and 2015, but then following the recession of 2016, poverty rose again. And the trend anyway was driven by the non-poor part of the welfare distribution, which is the kind of wealthier part, which more closely aligns to macroeconomic trends. But the poverty rate in rural areas compared to urban areas is much higher, as is the depth of poverty. The poverty in the northern part of the country tends to be much higher than across the south. It's also unevenly distributed across age groups. So children are much more likely to be poor compared to working age adults and compared to older people. And poverty is heavily determined by your sector of work. So you're much more likely to be poor if you're primarily engaged in agriculture, and less likely to be poor if you're engaged in non-farm enterprise work or indeed in wage work. Our data took us up to about 2019, but given that since that time, there's been COVID, there's been a huge cost of living crisis and kind of global inflationary trends. We don't yet have estimates for where the poverty is more recently than that, but you wouldn't be surprised if it took a turn for the worse given the global conditions. Next slide, please, Salim. So this is a graph that just shows that there's lots of movement between different parts of the welfare distribution. You can see that there's these different color bands. So the bottom band, which is the dark blue, is kind of represents the poorest decile in the country. And the top band, which is the dark green, represents the wealthiest decile. And what you can see is that households move up and down the welfare distribution all the time. I mean, this is a graph depicting the population of the northeast zone in the country. So you can see that people start out, they may start in the bottom, they may climb, they may fall again. People who are at the top of the wealth distribution may fall down it and climb back up it. And what it really is emblematic of is the fact that there's a high degree of vulnerability and low levels of resilience amongst much of the population. And another point just to make is that, as you saw with that flat welfare distribution, movement between the bottom 8 deciles or the first 8 deciles is really movement in and around different tiers of poverty, because people are on very low consumption at those across those first 8 deciles. So it really is kind of emblematic of the level of vulnerability in the country. Next slide, please, Salim. So, I mean, I haven't put it up here, but in our report in the annex is a table where we tried to track some of the major cash transfers and food assistance programs and public works programs that have been implemented over that period of kind of 2010 through 2019 in response to, in particular, the Boko Haram insurgency and the herder-farmer conflict. And what it shows is that there was a great number of programs delivered through the government, delivered by development and humanitarian partners, by NGOs, funding from EU, from the UK, from the US, from the Nigerian government. Perhaps, we haven't in no way, I expect, managed to track down every single program that has been administered. But the point is just to say that there was a huge amount going on, and each of these programs was was, you know, delivered by a different organization with a different mandate and a different set of rules and a different culture and a different set of objectives. So it just kind of highlights this terrain and the need for coordination to ensure that all of these different programs kind of work together to try and achieve the set of objectives which overlap. Another point to mention is that there's very little coverage by routine social protection to mitigate the welfare dynamics and the context of vulnerability to perpetual shocks that we just discussed. I mean, this, you know, as I say, we cover up to 2019, and I know that with the World Bank supporting the building of the National Registry, I expect that, you know, this is developed, and I'd hope that, you know, some more routine social protection is now beginning to be put in place. But the data that we had access to, which I say took us up to 2019, showed that it really was quite a low level of coverage by routine social assistance programs.
Sorry, Fred, just for you to rush out, you are already over time.
Okay, I will skip. I mean, I'll skip to this slide perhaps. Actually, no, maybe this is a good place to stop then, because we have a couple of slides and we could come back to them perhaps at the end of the conversation if need be, because these really are just about the findings we had around targeting. But I just wanted to say that, you know, one evidence gap that we found was information about the perceptions from communities, from beneficiary households and non-beneficiary households about the targeting approaches and mechanisms that are in place across all these different programs within the country. And so, I mean, closing that evidence gap through feedback mechanisms could be a really useful way to inform policy development going forward in relation to both routine social protection and humanitarian assistance. And while those things overlap with their mechanisms, you know, often delivering food or cash or vouchers in one way or another, they also have very different sets of objectives and underpinning principles and rationale. So it's really important that they're coordinated so that don't become confused in the minds of the populace, and so that they could both, you know, complement each other rather than detract from each other. So that need for coordination and feedback from communities is just important. So I'll stop it there, and apologies, Louis, because I've overspoken and I've taken away your chance, but perhaps we can jump back later if need be and present some of the results around the targeting. Over to you, Celine.
That's all right.
Thank you so much, Fred. And sorry for our mistakes. So you see here the presentation in French is obviously existing in English. The report is in English, and I've shared that in the chat. So please feel free to go back to the report, and we will share on the website the presentation in English and in French, obviously. Yeah, thank you for all that. If you have any burning question, because we are running out of time, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, so you can ask question, and Fred and Louis will be able to answer to you directly by writing. I really enjoy the presentation, even if I enjoy even more the report, because you have much more in the report than the presentation. But it's really striking how, in a very complex context that you described for Nigeria, there are room for better to link humanitarian assistance and social protection, and try to reach out the poorest and avoid them from falling back to extreme poverty when they manage to move out. So all the graphics that you show. So definitely a lot to go for that. And for this better system, you also highlight that it will be useful to integrate the population perception, use the complaint and feedback mechanism to inform what we are doing and to improve that. So thanks a lot for all that. And please, everyone, ask your question in the Q&A box. In the meantime, we would like to continue this journey together with Ground Truth Solution is to continue to discuss about accountability to affected population and complaint and feedback mechanism, maybe, because it's an organization with a goal to amplify the voice of the people affected by crisis and make that feedback the driver of more effective humanitarian action. So today, to present the Nigeria finding, we have Anna Miles, who is researcher and manager at Ground Truth Solution, where she managed the Cash Barometer initiative in Nigeria and Somalia. So the Cash Barometer is an independent accountability initiative that combines representative face-to-face survey with qualitative approach to enable cash and voucher recipients to provide feedback and influence decision-making. Anna has a background in statistics and international affairs, and she is then based in Vienna, Australia. Back to you, Anna.
Thanks very much, Celine. So if we could just pop the slides up, and I can already help us maybe save a little bit of time on who and what Ground Truth Solutions is, because I think Celine covered that nicely. So yeah, we can go to the next slide. I can already see many colleagues from Nigeria also on the call, so I won't spend too much time introducing this. So yeah, as Celine mentioned, our objective is to amplify the voices of affected people. And I think the more we go on this journey and the more we speak to people, the more we realize that this isn't just about humanitarian assistance, but people talk to us about a range of issues that affect them. And it has relevance to humanitarian actors, to development actors, to government. And so we can maybe also skip a few points there because I hadn't realized I had included these animations. But I think the point is that a lot of the findings that we have aren't just related to cash, but really about feedback in general and how it can help inform better action for a range of different actors. And if we go to the next slide, I'll hand over briefly to Emmanuel from FACT Foundation to introduce FACT. FACT have been our partners in Nigeria now for many years, I think since 2019. And all of this data is a joint effort between the two of us. So Emmanuel, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hannah. To also save time, FACT is a Nigerian-based not-for-profit organization. Our focus is promoting evidence-based decision-making and deploying innovative technology solutions. So with that, we have two main program areas, one that is focused on research, and then the other that is focused on deploying technology solution, and then the kind of cost cuts between each other. So back to you, Hannah.
Thanks, Emmanuel. So if we go to the next slide, the data that I'm going to be talking to you about today comes from the Cash Barometer. So that's an initiative that we've had in Nigeria since 2019. All of the data that I'll present are perceptions-based. So this really comes from us, so the FACT Foundation research teams, speaking to people about issues that are important to them through a range of methods. So a lot of quantitative surveys, but also following that up with qualitative research, and also going back to communities, fostering dialogue, and also conducting workshops, dialogue, training with humanitarian and development actors on the results of those findings as well. So if we move to the next slide, when I was thinking about this presentation and this webinar overall, I thought it was really important to clarify at the beginning, what are we all talking about when we talk about feedback mechanisms? There are obviously many different types of many different ways of collecting feedback, different ways of engaging with communities. And so I think for some, feedback mechanisms maybe evokes an image of a suggestion box or a hotline. And these are very much reactive feedback mechanisms, right? So something goes wrong potentially and somebody wants to maybe make a complaint. They're often sources of quite short feedback. And while we think that there is certainly a place for these type of feedback mechanisms, the data I think shows that there is more room and more potential also for proactive feedback from communities. So really having this dialogue, these in-depth conversations, and particularly ongoing dialogue, and not relying solely on feedback mechanisms. So yeah, I think for what I'm going to present, proactive feedback is really key. So maybe let's bear that in mind as we go through the results. If we can go to the next slide, please. So I think one key place where lessons can be drawn for both humanitarian CVA and social protection is about modality preferences. So how, in what form should people be assisted, and what is most helpful for them? So you see here, our survey was conducted in Borno and Yobe State in the Northeast. And you see here in Borno State, 42% of people said that it would be best if they received a mixture of food items in kind and cash assistance. Around a third then preferred a voucher that could only be used with specific vendors. And far fewer preferred unrestricted cash transfers. In Yobe, on the other hand, over half of people said they would prefer a voucher. Around 23% saying then unrestricted cash transfers would be their preference, and much fewer than in Borno State preferring a mixture of food items in kind and cash. Clearly, this information on its own represents a snapshot in time and is not particularly or is not the most helpful without some qualitative data to give us a bit more of the story. So if we go to the next slide, you get a sense of what was driving these perceptions. For example, one respondent told us, money has no value, food is much more valuable than money. Comparing vendor prices and market prices is very clear. Vendors are cheaper than high market prices. So here I think you can really see people suffering from inflation, from price inflation, and really feeling like their money doesn't go as far as it used to. This second respondent said unrestricted cash gives beneficiaries the freedom to buy food items of their choice. It also gives room for price bargaining in the market to enable recipients to buy food at a much cheaper price than the vendors' hiked prices. So here again, there's a bit of a contradiction with the other person. They feel like voucher vendors, because people are limited to purchasing only with those vendors, have too much power and maybe also increase prices. So in this feedback, I think you see potential issues with the implementation of a certain modality. And in the last quote, this person says, I'm just satisfied with the current modality. Assistance in the form of cash is mostly misused because people lack financial discipline. When they're given money to go and buy food, they might spend it on commodities that are not even necessary while the house is battling with hunger. And I show this because I think it shows that one thing that we see quite a lot in our research across different countries is that people often prefer what they're currently receiving. People are quite nervous of change, quite worried about what that might mean for their assistance. But also we saw in Nigeria this time a real sense from people that they were concerned about their own ability to manage money and to make the correct choices. None of this is to say that one modality is better than the other. And you know, when people are maybe saying that they prefer vouchers, I think there's evidence from this deeper look into their perceptions that there are other problems going on in the background, maybe driving this preference. And so this is just to give you an insight into the many, many different shades that can be found when you start looking into feedback more in detail. But as we'll see from the next slide, it's not just about the modality of assistance. We also asked people about how they would like to receive assistance. So for example, we asked, would you prefer to receive smaller cash transfers over a long period of time or larger transfers over a shorter period of time? And it was very clear 80% of people prioritized smaller transfers, but for that, the assistance lasting much longer. We tended to see that people found that easier to manage, found it more reliable. And if we go to the next slide, you will also see a similar question, but slightly different. Should aid providers prioritize giving more people smaller cash transfers or fewer people larger cash transfers? So essentially, would people prefer an assistance which reaches maybe the whole community, but in a thin way, or those who are really very, very vulnerable, most vulnerable in a much deeper way? And I was reflecting as Fred was talking about this very flat welfare distribution, and that it makes it very hard to distinguish between the poor and the ultra poor. And I think that could also be exactly what we're seeing here, that people find it when aid providers come and do targeting in their communities and say, these are the vulnerable and going to be reached by my program and these are not, or at least these aren't going to be reached by my program, even if they are vulnerable. People find that very unfair. And I think that's what you see in this data here. So I think both of those results are just one way of showing that small amounts of long-term aid makes it much easier for people to cope. And I think that's a lesson for that people prefer a system that more aligns with how social protection payments are made, longer term, smaller amounts, and that this could be one way of helping us consider how to best integrate people into those systems. Another way in which feedback mechanisms can help us support government social protection is that I think they can highlight problems so that social protection systems may be able to address these from the beginning. So I'm showing two graphs here of two questions we ask almost every year in our surveys, and that every year receive quite negative results. So this is, do you know how long your cash or voucher assistance will last? So what is the length of the program that you're in? And there's always a majority of people that actually are not sure when their last transfer is going to come. And the second question, do you know how aid providers decide who receives cash or voucher assistance and who does not? And again, around 50% that are unclear about the targeting criteria. And I think that's quite concerning for many humanitarians, but this is also something that seems quite difficult to change because we receive these results quite often. So I think I would just be interested, food for thought for the panelists to think about, is there a way that we can use feedback mechanisms more broadly to pass on information about these, where we see these information gaps, but also about social protection systems, how people can register and what the targeting is. I'm on my penultimate slide now. So if we can just jump forward. Apologies that my slide doesn't appear all at once. You can just do one more click, I think should do it. When you speak to people in depth about not only the aid they're receiving, but their long-term resilience, it's clear that it's not just about cash, but there are other support services that people feel they need. So for example, over 80% of people said that livelihood support would help them better manage or save their cash. More than half of people wanted support in setting up a bank account. And many people, particularly in Yobe State, over half of people in Yobe State wanted some training in financial management. So that links back to what I was mentioning before about people being unsure how to spend and how to make decisions around their money. And I think this quote I also found really interesting from a man in Burma who said, I would like to be included in the government social registry. However, the issue with the government is that they often introduce programs without providing adequate support. And I think this, linked with this graph, can maybe help us think about what ways can we link these two systems, social protection and humanitarian development, in a way that provides complementary support services, in a way that fosters cooperation. One example I also wanted to mention from a different context we work in Ukraine. We've seen a lot of great examples of linkages in Ukraine, and what has been seen as very helpful is humanitarians supporting people to plug back into social protection services. So providing that bridging gap, supporting people in getting their documents in order, things like this. So I think this is a way in which we can expand how this feedback is used, because people don't only have expectations of humanitarians, they have it of government, they have it of development actors, of maybe actors involved in climate. And I think a holistic system will better take into account all of that feedback. And then my last slide of content, a final area where I think we have really interesting information that can benefit both humanitarian CVA and social protection systems is our research on women's experience of cash. So we find broadly that CVA gives women a lot of stability, a lot of flexibility and security. So overall, very positive impacts. We find that women tell us that they want monthly cash distributions because they struggle, for example, when a lump sum is given, and they experience a lot of risks in terms of mismanagement, either by themselves or by other male members of their families. They also mentioned some risks that it can cause jealousy or feelings of exclusion when the woman in the household receives cash and the man doesn't. And I think the most important point that I wanted to raise here is that women don't always feel able to speak up. There are certain feedback mechanisms, for example, maybe going to a community leader where women might not feel comfortable providing feedback in that way. So I think this really shows that that we need to consider feedback and not just feedback mechanisms. How do we proactively address women for their feedback? And I think you see that in this quote here from a woman in Wulari IDP camp, who says, "Men have the power to say everything, women don't. If you speak up, they will end up insulting you, they intimidate you, and if you want to protect yourself and your children, you better mind your own business." So in summary, if we can go to the last slide, I think it is hugely important to gather feedback, that the principles of engaging with communities and accountability to these communities is exactly the same for both social protection systems and humanitarian CVA. I think we can all agree that people should be at the center of both, and it's just how we do that. So I think, yeah, hopefully I've shown you with just these small nuggets what valuable information we can get from communities about their priorities, about the kind of support they need. And yeah, perhaps there's a way of using these systems more as a way of not only just getting information from communities, but maybe also providing information to communities. And finally, I think, yeah, this can also empower people to be more involved and claim their rights. So if people are eligible for a certain type of assistance, they should be able to access it. So yeah, the main point I would like to leave us all with is that feedback should be both proactive and reactive. We should expand the ways in which we're collecting feedback and make sure that we're addressing many different sectors, not just humanitarian, but development, government. And let's think about how we all can better together foster the kind of dialogue that we think is needed. And yeah, that's where I'll end. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anna. Right on time, and I think I don't really need to do any wrap-up because you already do that. Making sure that we have people at the center in both humanitarian CVA, as you say, and social protection, using a complaint and feedback mechanism to share all the information, do better together. Obviously, as you say, also have reactive and proactive approach, but also thinking of not being only extractive about the information, but also sharing them widely. Thanks for all that. I feel that I have a lot of information to go with, and I hope the panel will enjoy that. If you have any question, either for Anna or for the previous presentation, please use the Q&A box. And now I'm giving back the floor to Mirko and maybe to Mr. Valentine, who just joined us recently. Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you very much, Celine. Thank you also, Anna, for this presentation. And it is wonderful also to have here our new participant, Mr. Valentine Zulu. Thank you very much, who is the Director of Humanitarian Affairs at the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Alleviation. thank you very much that you finally were able to connect because we know that you have a very, very busy schedule. And sorry if we had some also technical issues to let you in, but once we were already live, it was also challenging for us to manage this, but we are really happy to have you here. And before going to the panel session, we really thought to if you can just give us a couple of words so that maybe you can express also the importance, as you know, as we know that you are also chairing the National Cash Working Group in Abuja. You might be very familiar with all the thematics related to the linkages of humanitarian, CVA, and social protection. And today, for this webinar, we have also have a specific focus on the feedback mechanism and the accountability toward the assisted population. So we would like really to have your thoughts on that, on maybe the challenges, but also the opportunities that we can have in Nigeria together with the government of Nigeria, with your ministry, in order to see what also all the stakeholders can do together, humanitarian side, developments, and with the government in order to progress in this complex but interesting topic. Over to you, Mr. Valentine. If you can have 5 minutes discussion, then we'll pass over to the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Miko. I hope, can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much. Well, will I say it's a good afternoon to all the participants on this webinar. It is my pleasure to join other stakeholders in this second webinar series on linking humanitarian cash and voucher assistance, CVA, and social protection aimed at harvesting feedback mechanism in making it more people-centered in Nigeria. As we know, or as you, some of us may be aware, the Federal Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Alleviation recently, at the 7th National Humanitarian Coordination Technical Working Group meeting, reviewed and revalidated the National Cash and Voucher Assistance Policy in humanitarian context. The NCVA, which is the National Cash and Voucher Assistance, envisioned promoting an inclusive approach that will integrate the use and scale up cash and voucher assistance interventions in humanitarian context in preparation for social inclusion. Meanwhile, we in the ministry are eagerly awaiting the reviewed and the validated draft of the National Policy for Cash and Voucher Assistance to be transmitted to the Federal Executive Council for consideration and approval. The Federal Executive Council is the highest decision-making organ in the Nigerian government. Thereafter, the ministry will work towards ensuring the sensitization and advocacy for the operationalization and institutionalization of the strategic document at the subnational. At this juncture, it is imperative to mention that the linkage of cash and voucher assistance to social protection offers the prospect that stronger social protection systems will provide more effective assistance to people in crisis, makes people more resilient to shocks, and reduce the needs for humanitarian assistance. The following approaches are critical for linking cash voucher assistance to social protection. One, we are talking about the parallel approach, which is a standalone approach to humanitarian programming, which is used with no link to the state social protection system. Then there is also the leveraging approach. This is humanitarian-led, but involves the state and directly the users. We also have the aligned approach. This approach is humanitarian-led, but uses the state existing or future social protection system as a reference point. Finally, I would like to enjoin all participants to bring to bear their expertise, knowledge, and experience in this strategic meeting towards linking humanitarian cash and voucher assistance and social protection. I thank you for giving me this opportunity to share these few thoughts and words and remarks with you. Thank you very much. I wish you very fruitful deliberation. Thank you. I'm grateful. God bless Nigeria. Yes.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Valentine, for these words, that very important words. We go now to the panel discussion. So I can propose that if by chance you have time to stay with us, you could also have a kind of few words for close the webinar. If you are very busy with other meetings, we understand. So we also already thank for your intervention. It was very nice to have you here. So thank you very much again. So we'll move now. We are a little bit behind schedule, so I'm not going to introduce all the panelists in details, but I'm introducing the panelists. So we have in the panel we have Mr. Bashir that you have already seen because we have already presented in the introduction. In addition, we have other three people. We have Abidium Abaniwo, that he's the head of Department for Food Security and Livelihood at Action Against Hunger Nigeria office. Then we have also Akim Jola, who is the Senior Protection Program Policy Officer with WFP Nigeria. And finally, we have Emmanuel Elanatan, that you have already seen. And he's with FACT Foundation. He's a researcher and meal expert with years of experience, and he's also one of the co-founder of FACT Foundation. And finally, we have the pleasure also to have Stephen Lois, the moderator of this panel, that is with FCDO. He's a humanitarian development that has many years, over almost 30 years in experience in different contexts. Please join me to welcome all our panels today for a rich discussion after the presentation we had. Stephen, over to you, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Marco. And just a special thanks to our speakers so far and presenters. A lot of material there, a lot of things to think about, possible some extra questions to already think about, thanks to Hannah. And before directing a few questions to our panelists, I'd just say to people in the audience, we'll try to bring a few questions forward from yourselves to our panelists. But given some of the time constraints and the likely multitude of questions we might have, I just suggest to people to keep them coming via the Q&A section there on the screen. Then you can actually direct them to specific panelists and people, and they can get back to you, as we go along. So it might just facilitate things if we get a sort of overload of questions, and people can get them specifically answered. So we've got a few different channels going on, but hopefully it covers all the bases for everybody. So with that in mind, I've got a few questions here. What I'm going to try to do is direct them to some of our panelists specifically, which hopefully they can address. Please do feel free to however, to defer them, or if anyone else on the panel would like to jump in or add some details, please feel free to do so. And hopefully we can get through it all in decent time. So first off, and this is a question that probably Akeem might be good to kick off with, centering on accountability to affected populations, AAP. That's crucial for government, development and humanitarian stakeholders. I mean, according to yourself, our feedback mechanisms as part of AAP, are they valid entry points to link humanitarian cash and voucher assistance, or CVA, and social protection. So, and if yes, do you have some examples to demonstrate such linkages? Thanks so much. Over to you, Akeem.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen, for this very interesting question. And I'll answer in the affirmative. That's yes. CFM is part of the AHP accountability to affected population. It's one of the basic and important entry points for linking humanitarian cash and voucher assistance to social protection. As we all know, that WFP is the largest humanitarian assistance organization in terms of providing support and interventions for food and nutrition support globally. And in Nigeria, at the peak of our assistance during the lean period, we are reaching over 2 million Nigerians in terms of cash and voucher and in-kind assistance to really cater for their food and nutrition needs. Within the country strategic plan of WFP Nigeria, supporting and leveraging government-led social protection and other development partner social protection to really address the needs of the people is one of the key pillars in our CSP, which we are running now between year 2023 to 2027. So affirmative, the CFM is one of the basic entry points to social protection. What are the instances? One single instance that I will bring to the attention of this event is between year 2020 to 2022. WFP was part of the UN joint projects in Sokoto State, Northwest Nigeria. And the project was an intervention from the Secretary General of the UN office. And the title of project is Leveraging Social Protection for Accelerated Achievement of SDG Goals in Nigeria. And Sokoto State was chosen as a state. How do we go at it? WFP was to handle the delivery parts using of the cash within the social protection project. And the project, the intervention was basically to address the health and nutrition indicators in Sokoto State. Let me also make reference to what Fred and Hannah mentioned. CFM in WFP is a two-way communication project that allows populations, opinion leaders, community leaders, project staff, community, and every stakeholders to really contribute to the design, first design, second delivery, and third, the assurance of any intervention, whether in the humanitarian setting or within the social protection space. So in the project in Sokoto State, WFP takes the lead in terms of the delivery of the cash to address the health and nutrition indicators in Sokoto State. And when we leverage on the CFM, we were able to really tweak the design of the projects that were to be carried out. One, to address the demand within from the health, the demand of the people in Sokoto State. These are pregnant women, children, aged people who really want to access their healthcare needs. You remember that when we say social protection, we have the social assistance, we have the social insurance, we have the social care. So in terms of the social insurance, the level of enrollment into the healthcare insurance in Sokoto State was so low, and want to leverage on this intervention to really increase the enrollment into the social insurance, particularly from the informal sector. So when we deploy our CFM mechanism, it allows us to identify what are the supply gaps and the demand needs of the people to really ensure that people can access the health insurance scheme, and also so that they can bring on board what are their complaints, what are the challenges they are facing in terms of getting their healthcare needs. What are the challenges that really affect them from accessing the healthcare or from enrolling in the health insurance? So, and what would be the best delivery modality to really get this cash to the needed people, the affected population, so that they can really have the cash. So the deployment of the CFM, it allows us to really tweak the design of the social protection project. It allows us to get to identify which delivery mechanism and modality will really make the cash available to the affected population, I mean the beneficiaries that are needed. And the CFM, both right from the beginning and down to the end, also allow us to address what are the challenges for those who have failed transaction in terms of getting the cash, how do we really address that? So the leveraging on the CFM in that instance, it really provides us the opportunity of ensuring that the project achieve the desired needs. And at the end of the day, when we are evaluating the project, we realize that the beneficiaries were able to get, as they have food needs, there was increments in hospital attendance, then delivery in terms of attendance, antenatal care at the hospital also improved. All these really contributed, and is an evidence to the fact that when we leverage CFM right from the beginning, there could be an improved service delivery, both in the social protection delivery and humanitarian cash. We were able to do this because we have all the experience in our previous delivery of humanitarian assistance, both in cash and voucher, both in Nigeria and outside the shores of Nigeria. Thank you so much, Steve.
Great, thanks for that. And I'll take the liberty of just freestyling here a little bit, given your response. I'll just ask a supplementary question, and if anyone else wants to jump in on the panel, they're feel free to do so. But with regards to your efforts, the project, and the many positive results that it ended up having, did you expect that as WFP, or were some aspects and the response a surprise? I mean, did you have other countries to base things on? So when you were developing things, you figured, okay, if we do this, we'll probably get these results, we'll probably get this feedback, or were some aspects quite novel, quite a surprise? Thanks again.
Yeah, so during the implementation of the projects, we were really surprised that in Sokoto State, considering that the Northwest, just like Fred has given the frame of Nigeria, the situation in the Northeast and the situation in the Northwest. Sokoto State is a state in the Northwest. Yes, it's affected by some crisis and conflict, but Sokoto State, generally the Northwest, are not in the same frame as the Northeast. So it was assumed that the access to infrastructures like the financial service providers, access to healthcare needs will be much more easier. And also the presence of the infrastructures and facility to take care of the health needs of the people will be there. And rather, maybe due to sociocultural norms or whatever, maybe that is the reason why people have not been accessing the healthcare. But when we deploy the CFM, to our surprise, we find out that this population really prefer to go to the local attendants in terms of their healthcare and delivery compared to the hospital facilities, the former health facilities. Why? They feel the demand side, the hospitals are there, but the drugs, the way they attend to them, the supplies, and the personnel, there are really some issues around that. And then we were able to sit down, mobilize the Sokoto State Community Health Management Agency, Primary Healthcare Development Agency to discuss all of this, leveraging on different tools within the CFM, community management structures, the GFD, to really discuss all of this and ensure that all these issues were addressed. And when these issues were addressed, there was a quick upscale in terms of the hospital attendance, because people were now able to express themselves, not just as a reaction, but right from the beginning, and this issue was addressed. Also in terms of the delivery, it was thought that, we can just leverage on bank accounts and some other delivery mechanism. But we were able to see that most of the people really have some constrained access around national identity issue that will allow them to fulfill the KYC, know your customers, to really have the bank account. And most of this population do not have a formal bank account. So this allows us to really mobilize the National Identity Management Commission to really spread out how to really ensure that these people have access to their NIN, And then again, we were also able to tweak the delivery mechanism to the use of a prepaid card and other delivery modality. In WFP in the Northeast, we are using the three modalities, the in-kind, we are using the voucher, and we are also using the cash. And as a result of this, we are able to translate the delivery mechanism rather than from the bank account to the use of the prepaid cards. And we also put the CFM in place. If there is any failed transaction, any complaint in terms of the delivery of the cash, people were able to quickly flag it, and we were able to respond within a very short timeline to ensure that they got it. So this shows that sometimes the assumption why we are having the project conception, as in social protection development, social intervention development, it may not really work out by the time we get to the field. When we leverage on the CFM right from the beginning as part of the AAP, it allows us to really design the project in a more effective manner to achieve the program objective. Thank you.
Okay, no, thanks for that, and thanks too for the additional details. I'll keep things moving along now, so we stay roughly on time with the question here, and this is for Abidun with ACF Nigeria, and the question is, how can sharing feedback from both communities and staff between humanitarian cash and voucher programs and social protection systems serve as a first step toward better integration and coordination. Any thoughts on that? And then we can maybe open it up to the rest of the panel as well if they've got some thoughts for yourself or even the previous question. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Stephen, and good afternoon, colleagues. So this is a very valid question, especially because humanitarian cash or voucher assistance often seen by displaced population to be the more ideal because of the how large it comes. Transfer value is more higher and all that. So at ACF, we have an experience where we are implementing two projects, one addressing humanitarian actions, addressing humanitarian situations using cash and vouchers and food vouchers, and another one trying to build resilience of communities that are hosting IDPs. And the grievances has always been, why are you giving this set of people this so value of voucher or cash, and ours is on like the safety nets approach tailored to the government of Nigeria's approaches. So one of the best way to do this from my experience is to integrate feedback and complaint mechanism for both CVA in humanitarian action and for social protection or social safety net approaches. And I will tell you that in the first year when we begin to encounter differences and challenges with feedback coming from different channels. As you are aware, the government uses the GRM mechanism, which is more using government volunteers to gather some grievance and redress from beneficiaries, and which are analyzed, and they are able to provide feedback, able to support the beneficiaries better. Why we use more of the humanitarian approaches, the complaint booths, suggestion boxes, and the calling phone, the dedicated phone number that they can call on. So we realize that we need to integrate this. And what are the ways that we first do this? We have to have series of community engagements, with community leaders and community representatives, including CBOs that are present within this community, to first explain the differences in this both intervention and to explain their alignments, that at a point, people can move from humanitarian action into a more of resilience and social protection, stability, where this support can come in and they begin to rebuild themselves, while the token coming from the social safety net approaches are able to support them to meet their daily needs. So we integrate all the complaints to be one, to come from addressed by the same team and to be analyzed by the same team. And as well, that helps us to really make the beneficiaries understand the differences first in this approach, and to understand the linkages as well, because the projects later transcend humanitarian returnees at some point into social safety nets and livelihood interventions. So another way to do this would be to really engage the community in terms of feedback and lessons harmonization for humanitarian CVAs as well as for social safety nets. So a joint concerted effort of that nature will help to bridge the gap and help promote understanding, help to, even for organizations or governments who want to do the linkages, will help to promote that linkages. And another way to do it also would be to have the local and state coordination mechanism. We set up something like that in Borno State in Northeast, where we have already there's established cash working group, there's the food security sector. Then we have the social protection network or working group, which also comprises of humanitarian actors, development actors, partners, government, and all that. So coming together, this really helps to, we realize that we are sharing the different experiences we were having, but the feedback and the complaints seems to be aligned. So, and in that forum, it helps us to understand how best we can tailor humanitarian actions or link social protection to CVA, and how we can make that transition from that humanitarian action to CVA, or to social protection programs. So this approaches has helped also to kickstart that. Then, maybe not for ACF, it may not be in the Northeast, in the Northwest. One approach that we took was, of course, supporting policies that social protection, holistic policy is very important to all what we are saying, because it contains the social protection domains, the thematic areas that the states would want to implement as time goes on. It also contains the operational plan. And in the operational plan, there's the feedback, complaint, redress mechanism, strategy that is attached to that. So a forum where we had people like SEMA, who are first responders to humanitarian crisis, be it man-made or artificial, natural, are able to, we brought them into this forum to discuss with social protection actors. So they are key players as well. We have people from different MDAs, we have humanitarian actors, we have colleagues from the UN agencies, we have colleagues from development partners making inputs. And while these policies is being developed, inputs are coming from different actors into this. We have community representatives, we have CSO partners who help us collate also feedback and what the beneficiaries of both humanitarian assistance and social protection assistance would like to see. So it helps us in terms of design, in terms of approaches, even in terms of transfer values and in terms of frequencies also. So we were able to analyze all this together, and it helped us to come up with, we can't say it's a perfect policy or program, but at least feedback we're able to help shape the design of this entire design of our project, and we begin to leverage on this. Even in Sokoto, Borno, we take lessons from all what we have done and see that feedback and complaint mechanism is very a viable tool to help link this. And all actors, all stakeholders involved, from the beneficiaries to implementers to policy makers to government, needs to be part of all this. Thank you. Let me stop here for a while.
Okay, thanks so much for that. I realize that our time has actually slipped away quick. So rather than stopping here and bringing extra things in, what I'll do is move to a third question for Emmanuel, and hopefully we can still then have time and then wrap up with other people as well. So I'll just quickly move on to him, and then we'll see if we can bring some extra things in. But thanks for that. And thanks also for bringing up the Northwest as an example too. Interesting context there to hear. So just for Emmanuel, and maybe we'll have to be a little more brief with you. In your view, what strategies have proven effective in increasing beneficiary trust and participation in cash and voucher programs, through use of feedback mechanisms? And how could these strategies be used in social protection programs, or the other way around if you've got examples of that? I'll stop it there and over to you, Emmanuel. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Steve. I'll also try to keep it very short. But just getting the submissions of my co-panelists and the presentations that we've had today really got me thinking. So first, zooming out a bit, I would say for me, in the long run, the aim would be to ensure that humanitarian assistance transitions smoothly into social protection support. I'm sure we are all in agreement on this. What does this mean? This means having a harmonized single social register that incorporates elements of humanitarian CVA to provide emergency cash transfer during crisis. So when Mr. Bashir was speaking, he gave an example of Yobe State, where they have 3 different types of registry. So I'm sure for him, even in the long run, he would want a situation where we would have one single register where with the flexibility to be able to address issues and crises as they occur. So now going back to the question, and in responding to this, I'm going to be leaning a lot on bits of Hannah's presentation and some of the findings from the cash barometer. So we see that, from the cash barometer assessment, we found that a majority of people are aware of complaints and feedback mechanisms, but the knowledge and usage vary, especially amongst the most vulnerable group. So that is one very key finding. Another is we found that people prefer generally face-to-face communication with humanitarian staff and community leaders as the channel to provide feedback. So our more traditional complaint boxes and hotlines were not as preferred as face-to-face interaction. And then why am I bringing up these findings? I think it's quite important when we are thinking about strategies for implementing better CFMs that the community would trust and use more. We need to think about these things. So, and also most people who, of course, know about feedback mechanisms have never filed a complaint before. So most of the respondents, even though they know about these mechanisms, they have never filed a complaint before. And of course, this is maybe because most do not have a complaint, but this is kind of indicative of something. It tells us something. Another important finding is people were saying they didn't have enough information about the feedback process from end to end. So submitting the complaint and what happens after the complaints are submitted and when they will expect answer. So seeing all of this, getting all of this feedback from the communities, I think a few strategies would come to mind when talking about what we can do to improve community trust and participation in our feedback mechanism. So, of course, the obvious one is making the process clearer, yeah? So make it clearer and communicate to the communities so that they really understand how the system works. So this means we are making the system more transparent, and this can be a really good strategy in improving community trust and participation. Another thing which I think is, I don't know how this suggestion would go, but leaning more towards face-to-face feedback mechanisms. I mean, from the findings, we see that people trust speaking to organization staff about their problems, and they also trust speaking to their community leader about their problems. And these are mostly face-to-face interaction. So when we are designing CFM systems going forward, it'd be a good idea to lean it more towards these face-to-face channels and less towards your complaint boxes, hotlines, and the rest. And it's good to have them so that for different reasons, protection and whatever reasons, but in the terms of how you design it, maybe you look at that particular direction. Yeah. And I think Abiodun made some very, very important suggestion about social protection and humanitarian CVA and how the feedback mechanisms would link. That is a very key point. And linking these two things will go a long way in really, really helping the way we intervene or the kind of support we give to this affected community. What that means is there won't be people lost in the cracks. So where social protection programming covers and where humanitarian CVA covers will be fully overlapped, and we won't have, most times, the most vulnerable groups being missed. And how do we do that? Of course, we need to utilize technology, and very importantly, we need to have an interoperable feedback systems between CVA and social protection. What does that mean? Basically, this is a system whereby data generated from one can easily fit or can seamlessly fit into the other. I know Abiodun spoke about how for their humanitarian CVA program, they implemented one method of feedback collection, and then the government, as I mentioned, had the GRM. So we need a system whereby we can be able to put this together and then share data, yeah? And this sharing, of course, we're not talking about just aggregated program level learnings. We're talking about actual feedback from the community. So having a space whereby we can collect all of this information and then make joint decision. For that to happen, of course, we need to agree on the standard between the government, the CVA actors, and the social protection actors, and what this method and this approach would be. I think that will be key. So yeah, overall, this linkage is possible, I think. Of course, there's considerations for data protection and technological issues, but I'll push that as one of the main areas for us to look at. And then generally improving the way we communicate. We explain the process for CFM to the community will really help to build trust and participation. Hope I didn't take too much time.
No, I think that was actually, I mean, quite helpful. And one of the questions we had coming from the audience concerned challenges and solutions that yourselves from different organizations had faced. So I was going to kind of jump on that, but maybe I can actually bring Mr. Bashir back into the conversation on that note. You know, with that particular question from the audience, and maybe just focusing on you know, your specific area in Yobe State, whether from government or across the sort of humanitarian development landscape in general, Mr. Bashir, I mean, are there any particular challenges that you sort of see, or any solutions that have come forward recently, or that you see that might be interesting to bring up, or helpful to sort of raise among ourselves here? Any thoughts on that? Over to you. Thank you very much.
Stephen, I have the impression that Mr. Bashir had a connection problem. He came back. I'm not sure that he got all the question.
Yeah. Do you want me to
Yeah,
pose
sorry,
it
can you
again?
take that question again?
Yeah, no trouble at all. We just had Emmanuel bringing up, rather fleetingly, some of the challenges and solutions they face with regards to feedback mechanisms and the talking between systems. In parallel, we sort of had a question from the audience about the challenges and solutions that organizations have faced. So I then just wondered, I mean, from the position of government, but even generally across, the humanitarian development landscape, where you are and in your area of responsibility, what sort of challenges or solutions have you faced, or do you see generally across the landscape, that might be sort of helpful to put forward, or interesting to sort of flag for the horizon? Thanks so much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Steve, for that question. I think some of the challenges that we have been faced include, one, the minimal utilization of the social register. Most programs come in, they go into the communities and select their beneficiaries. Although every program has its selection criteria. However, the fact that we have a state social register means that we need more coordination, more usage of that register. Although, like I mentioned earlier, we have 3 sets of registers, and Abiodun did mention about unifying these registers into one single register. The thing is, we have these multiple registers because they serve a various purpose. For the URB is for internally displaced, the IDPs. The SSR is for residents of communities. The RRR is for the rapid response initiative, or as a result of the lockdown. But there is a linkage between the RRR and the SSR, because the SSR is a continuous process, whereas we have not reached, we started with the poorest of the poorest communities, which are the rural areas. And then we're moving slowly up to the urban areas. And with the lockdown, there was this realization that, okay, there are poor people in the urban areas that needs also, quick intervention. So by the time we roll over the SSR, we're going to reach up to the, urban poor, and those in the the RRR will automatically, feed into the SSR. But the thing is, there is very minimal utilization of the SR by partners, so we need to have that, connection, that coordination, whereby partners will mine from, the register. For example, if you want to dash out the CVA, you're looking at the poorest of the poor, and the objective is to, have them have access to, the basic necessities of life, food, shelter, maybe clothing. And these people are also in the register. And this register is like 3-4 years old, and people have not utilized it. And another program is coming to the village, to the community, and also mining, potential beneficiaries, and they tend to lose, interest, or, they tend to lose that, perception that yes, the social register is there to help, their situation. So basically, that's the first, problem that we had. The second one is the need for third party monitoring, where projects have their monitoring, officers. They go to the field. They already have that conception of what to monitor, not necessarily, looking at the other aspects of the feedback mechanism, just like Hannah presented, where people are saying their perception is to have a long-term, period for fund disbursement, where others are saying, no, it should be a short-term, period and one-off disbursement. So once you have a third-party monitor, especially with the use of community-based organizations or community civil society organizations, we tend to get, the first-hand, feedback from the people that will say, yes, that is exactly what is, going on at the community level. The utilization of the, cash, the exploitation by vendors, exploitations by money agents, where, our people lack that technical capability of, cash withdrawal using the electronic systems. And of course, another thing that we're looking at is aligning our objectives. For CVA, it's like a short-term approach, targeting, displays and immediate needs. Whereas people are looking at, okay, what happens after the CVA? Some people are on the move. They have lost their property, although they have, some other assets, which they don't tend to dispose. So their next line of, transition is moving to a safer place for them to resettle. And just giving them, the CVA. Then what next? Then we need to align our objectives in terms of, the CVA as well as the social protection. So I would say, okay, if we're giving you CVA for the immediate needs, then the next set of programs will now, come up, align their objectives with that. Okay, the beneficiary of the CVA will now need income generating activity, skills acquisition, and maybe support for resettlement in other areas. So basically, once we harness these objectives together, it will give us a smooth transition, from the CVA linkage with social protection. And of course, timely response to the FMC is also very, very important, where people tend to give their feedbacks and it takes a long time before they get feedback from, the program. And of course, not only that, the feedback, but also the design of the, the program itself, where the time taken for selection of beneficiaries, enrollment, and disbursement of the cash takes too long. It tends to deprive people of, clear understanding of the policies and programs. Over. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for that. Those are sort of four quite pertinent and very valuable areas. So, I mean, I think very good for the audience and also particularly me. And I'll sort of take off my moderator hat. And as someone with the High Commission here in Abuja and fairly new to Nigeria, that's in fact very helpful information for me. So a rather personal thank you to you on that note, and to Mr. Valentin also for his comments earlier. So thank you very much. I think probably we've got to wrap things up, and I'll hand things back over to Mirko and Celine, because it seemed like we had so much time at the outset, and it's gone very quickly, and we've gone definitely into overtime. So just on my behalf, as the moderator here, thank you very much for all the presentations, all the questions and dialogue on that side of the screen that's come in. And thank you very much for letting me be involved with this to everyone. And I'll hand it back over to Mirko and Celine. So thanks again.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you very much to all the panelists for this great discussion. Very interesting, even though there are plenty of challenges, but very interesting points that were raised. As you also mentioned, we have run over 47 minutes now, so we are on the closing remarks. I'm wondering if Mr. Valentine is still available to give us a few words for the next future, or if we need to close ourselves. So because I see that Mr. Valentine is still connected, is it possible for him to provide some few words for as closing remarks, or is he busy? Let's wait a couple of seconds to see if he is available. Meanwhile, we can also share a short survey that we prepare for our audience. Please, Sophie, if you can share the survey. So we ask people to fill out the survey. At the same time, I do not see if Mr. Valentine is available or not. So maybe we can try for the closure. In case he is available, we can also give the floor to him for a couple of minutes. So I will introduce Rami Baker, that is with the Catholic Relief Service, and he is also co-leading the cash working group in Nigeria. So for some few, we are run out of time, but just a few comments on closing this webinar. It would be wonderful if you can enlighten us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mirko. And thanks for the panelists and the presenters today, and Mr. Valentine, who I think he just switched on his camera. So allow me to wrap things up, Mr. Valentine, and then we will go back to you so you can give us the final words. So I think I won't go into all of the details of the presentations and everything because we went over time, but I think what sticks out today from the panelist discussions and the presentations is we all agree on the importance of social registers. We all agree on the importance of feedback mechanisms and the channels that people prefer to share this feedback, and then how we build out those systems and how we collate all of this information from recipient to humanitarian organizations, to development organizations, to government, along the entire chain. So I think it's very clear that everybody is in agreement about all of these issues. I hope that with today's conversations, we would be able to carry this agenda forward. And again, I want to thank also our panelists. I'd like to thank our colleagues at CALP. I'd like to thank also Mr. Bashir and Mr. Valentine. I go back to you, Mirko, perhaps if you'd like to close today's session, or perhaps Mr. Valentine can give us a final few words before we close.
Yes, thank you very much, Rami. I see that you are connected, Mr. Valentine. Please, the floor is yours. If you can, please provide some closing remarks from this webinar. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah, thank
perfect.
you. All right. Thank you very much. Let me at this juncture appreciate all the participants, most especially the panelists who have made meaningful contribution to this discussion. I want to say that there's no doubt that we've been able to learn one or two things that will be beneficial and that will also enhance our own process in terms of the national catch VASHA policy we're trying to put together. However, we will appreciate if some of the partners who have been coming into the country will make adequate and effective use of the National Social Register, which has been put in place to ensure that the benefit that is derivable for the national catch and voucher policy is fully utilized and most beneficial to Nigerians who are in this process. It is pertinent for us to note that the National Social Register was put together through the ABLE support, active support, or the World Bank. So it's a very, very reliable database that we will encourage any willing partner who is ready to support Nigeria in assisting and addressing the issue of the poor of the poorest in the country should make adequate use of. Once again, I want to thank you all for your meaningful contribution to this discussion. Thank you and all the best.
Thank you very much, Mr. Valentine, for your availability today, for your remarks during the webinar, also for these closing remarks. Thank you very much for your participation. So really sorry to the audience. We have run out of time, almost half an hour late, but we are really happy to see that there are still many people that in the call. So thank you to all of you. I would like to thank Mr. Valentine, Mr. Bashir, the government of Nigeria for the participation, but I would like also to thank all the speakers, Anna, Luis, Fred, and also all the panelists moderated by Stevens. Thank you, Steven, and thank you all of you, Emmanuel, Hakim, Abidum. So thank to all of you for this wonderful webinar. Thank you also to my colleagues, Celine, Abdullah, and also those as Sophie that are behind the scene that you don't see too much, but thank you to all of them for the support. And thank you also to all of you that have participated. We really hope that this webinar is really helping the government of Nigeria, and also thanks to the cash working group that has participated to OCHA as well. We really hope that the dynamics of the linkages, the discussion between the government, the humanitarian and the development partners will continue in the months ahead in order to find a solution, as also Mr. Valentine has said, with the different words that he has presented to us. Again, thank you very much, and looking forward, we will post the recording and also the presentation in the CALP webpage, and we will look forward also to see you in the next webinar. Please watch out to when it will be done. Thank you very much, and have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you, colleagues. Bye.